Unlock the door, Brooke. His voice was so calm it didn't even sound like a threat. That was the part that scared her most. She pressed her back against the washing machine, her left arm hanging wrong, the kind of wrong that made her stomach fold in on itself, and she understood, clearly for the first time, that the man on the other side of that door had never been who she thought he was. She had one bar of signal, one chance, and she used it. Before we go further, if this story stays with you, please subscribe to this channel and follow along all the way to the end. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The dinner party had ended at 9:45. Brooke knew the exact time because she had been watching the clock above the kitchen door for the last 2 hours, counting down, willing the guests to leave. She had smiled the entire evening. She had passed appetizers, laughed at the right moments, touched Grant's arm the way she knew he liked when company was around. And she had done all of it while knowing what was in her phone's photo roll. 26 images, invoices with altered dates, wire transfer records that didn't match the public filings, a thread of messages between Grant and a man named Clifton, who ran a financial services firm in Denver, discussing how to categorize expenses so they'd pass the quarterly audit. The Veterinary Relief Fund, the one that carried her father's name on the donor plaque, the one she had volunteered with for 3 years. Before Grant suggested she step back, had been bleeding money for 18 months. And the blood trail led directly to the Mercer Foundation's operating account. She had known for 6 days. She had spent 6 days deciding what to do with what she knew. She had almost called Rosa twice. She had typed a message to her mother and deleted it. She had sat in the driveway of this house, this beautiful, isolated house that Grant had said was their fresh start, 40 minutes from the nearest town, and she had told herself she needed more time. She didn't have more time anymore. The last guest, a county commissioner named Hargrove, who wore bow ties and laughed too loud, had shaken Grant's hand and said, "Cedar Ridge is lucky to have you. Grant, a man like you doesn't come along twice." The door closed. Grant turned around, and the smile was still there. But underneath it, something else was running. Brooke had learned to read the difference. Most people never saw it. She saw it every time now. "Good night," she said. "You were quiet." He said it without moving. Just a statement, flat and even. "I had a headache. He didn't tell me. I didn't want to interrupt." He nodded slowly, the way he did when he was deciding whether to accept something or unpack it. "Come sit with me." "I'm tired, Grant. I'd like to go to bed," I said. "Come sit with me." She sat. He poured 2 glasses of wine and set one in front of her and didn't touch his own. He looked at her for a long time before he said anything. The fire was still going. The house smelled like cedar smoke and the garlic from dinner. Outside, the rain had started, the slow, insistent kind that meant it would be there all night. "You've been distracted for a week," he said. "Work stress." She no longer volunteered for the relief fund, but she still did administrative consulting from home, another thing he had suggested, after the job at the clinic became inconvenient for his schedule. "You don't have work stress. I manage your accounts." She picked up her wine. "Grant, give me your phone." She didn't react. She had practiced not reacting. She had practiced it the way some people practice breathing exercises, deliberately, quietly, without letting anything show on her face. "Why?" she asked. "Because I'd like to see it." "That's not a reason." Something shifted in his expression. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was more like a door opening onto a room he usually kept closed. "Brooke, give me the phone." "No." The word came out smaller than she intended, but it came out. He heard it. And what happened after that happened very fast. He stood. He crossed the room in 3 steps. He reached for her arm, not her hand. Her arm, above the wrist, and he twisted. And she felt the pop before she felt the pain. And then the pain arrived, like a wall falling on her. And the wine glass shattered on the floor, and she was on her knees, making a sound she didn't recognize as her own voice. "Where is the phone?" Grant said. Calm, measured. The voice he used in board meetings. She couldn't answer. She was trying to breathe. She was trying to understand what had just happened to her arm, because it was hanging in a way arms did not hang. She got to her feet. She didn't know how. Her vision was tunneling in from the edges, but she got to her feet and she walked down the hallway and she went into the laundry room and she locked the door behind her. The lock was a simple twist knob, the kind that a determined person could get through in under a minute. She knew that. She pressed herself into the corner between the washing machine and the wall, and she looked at her phone in her good hand, and she thought, with the same strange clarity you get in the middle of a car accident, that she had approximately one chance to do something useful. She had one bar. She opened her messages, and she pulled up Rosa's name, and she typed with her thumb, slowly, each word costing her something she wasn't sure she had. He broke my arm. The invoices prove everything. If I disappear, open Dad's red toolbox. She hit send. Then Grant's voice came from the other side of the door, and it was the worst thing, worse than the shouting she'd imagined, worse than anything she'd prepared herself for, because it was quiet, controlled, almost gentle. Brooke, unlock the door. We can talk about this. She didn't answer. You're making this harder than it needs to be. She looked at her phone. The message showed one check mark. Sending. Still sending. I know you're frightened. That's my fault. I shouldn't have grabbed you like that. I lost my temper. It won't happen again. It was a good performance. She recognized that now. She had believed versions of it before, not versions involving broken bones, not this far, but versions of the same script, the same calibrated remorse delivered in the same even tone. She had believed them because she had wanted to, and because she was afraid of what it would mean if she didn't. The checkmark didn't change. She had worked with this man for 2 years. 2 years of watching him manage rooms, manage people, manage narratives. She had watched him take a situation that was going against him, a vendor dispute, a difficult board member, a reporter, asking uncomfortable questions about the foundation's administrative costs, and she had watched him reshape it, word by word, until everyone in the room forgot what they had originally been concerned about. She was not going to let him do that to her. Not tonight. She looked at the broken arm. She looked at the phone. She looked at the door. Outside, rain hit the roof in sheets. She didn't know it yet, but the message wasn't going anywhere near Rosa. Grant had cut the cell service 3 months after moving her to this house. Not all at once, that would have been too obvious. He had suggested switching carriers, then said the new plan was having trouble in this area, then mentioned he'd found a satellite router that worked much better. What he had not mentioned was that the router was configured to block outgoing calls and texts to numbers not on an approved list. The approved list had 22 contacts on it, all of them people who had reason to keep Brooke tethered to Grant's world. Rosa's number was not on it. What the router could not account for was the emergency satellite relay that Brooke's father, Patrick Callahan, had installed in this house 11 years before Grant bought it. Patrick had been a motorcycle mechanic and an obsessive preparer. He had installed the relay for wildfire season, when cell towers went down and his wife was home alone with a small daughter. It ran on a separate frequency, piggybacked onto an emergency broadcast band, and it had not been used in years. Grant hadn't known it existed. Brooke's phone, searching desperately for signal, found it. The message left the house. It did not reach Rosa. It reached an old group number one Patrick had set up years before with a handful of riders he trusted, back when he ran the repair shop and people called him at all hours when their bikes broke down on mountain roads. He had called it his emergency relay, half joking, because he would have stopped what he was doing at 2 in the morning to help any of those men, and they would have done the same. Patrick Callahan had been dead for 3 years. His wife had kept his phone plan going for 6 months before finally canceling it. But the group number had been taken over by Wade Dalton, a barrel-chested man with a gray beard and a leather cut that said Hell's Angels in bold yellow letters across the back. Wade was 58 years old and had known Patrick since before Brooke was born. He had been in the group the night Patrick called to say the shop's boiler had flooded and he needed help moving equipment. He had been there the night they'd gotten the call that Patrick's truck had gone off a mountain road in February, and they'd all driven out in the dark to help get it back. He had been there the morning They'd stood in a cemetery and watched Patrick's casket go into the ground. And Wade had shaken Nora Callahan's hand and not been able to find a single word that felt adequate. He had been there 2 days before the funeral, when Patrick, in the hospital and running out of time, had asked Wade to sit down next to his bed and had said something that Wade had never told anyone. If my girl ever calls, Patrick's voice had been rough, stripped down, barely there. If she ever calls, don't ask whether it's convenient. Don't ask what she did or didn't do. Just answer. Wade had said, I'll answer. He had meant it the way you mean something when the person asking you can't afford to be wrong. When Brooke's message arrived on the group relay at 11:52 p, 3 fragments of a message, split by the weak signal, reassembling in Wade's notification bar like a puzzle piece, snapping into place. He read it once, and then he read it again, and then he called the number back and got nothing. He recognized the name. He didn't hesitate. He called 911 first. He gave them the address, the old Callahan property on Ridgeback Road, now registered to a company called Mercer Holdings, and he read them the text verbatim and told them who he was and what he believed was happening. He gave them his full name, badge number on his Hells Angels chapter membership, and said he would be on record as the caller. He told the dispatcher that he and his routers would be traveling to the scene and that all of them would be operating helmet cameras and keeping full footage for law enforcement if needed. The dispatcher asked him to wait for police to assess the situation. Wade said, "Ma'am, this woman has a broken arm." "I'm not waiting." He hung up. He sent a message to 12 riders in the group. He typed 3 words, "Patrick's girl now." Then he replied to Brooke's text, not knowing if she could receive it, not knowing if she was still conscious, or still had the phone, or still had anything at all. "This is Wade Dalton. Your father trusted me. Police and paramedics are coming. So are we. Stay away from the door." He got on his bike. On the other side of the laundry room door, Grant's strategy had shifted. He'd been quiet for 4 minutes, Brooke had counted, and then he came back with a different approach. "I'm going to get a doctor," he said. "I'm going to call Dr. Whitmore right now and have him come out here. You don't have to open the door. I'm just letting you know." She recognized Dr. Whitmore's name. She had met him twice at foundation events. He had the kind of practiced warmth that felt like a job skill. "That arm needs to be looked at," Grant continued. "You can be angry with me and still let someone help you. Those are 2 different things." She didn't answer. "Brooke, be reasonable." She looked at her phone. The message to Rosa had never gone through. But there was something else on her screen, an incoming text from a number she didn't recognize, a number with a 719 area code. She opened it with her thumb. "This is Wade Dalton. Your father trusted me. Police and paramedics are coming. So are we. Stay away from the door." She read it 3 times. Her father had been dead for 3 years. She had not heard Wade Dalton's name in 2, maybe 2.5 years, but she knew who he was. She had grown up watching him come in and out of her father's shop, remembered the sound of his laugh from the back bay where they worked on engines together. She remembered being 12 years old and thinking that Wade Dalton was the most intimidating man she'd ever seen, and then watching him crouch down and spend 20 minutes helping her understand how a carburetor worked because she'd asked a question and he'd taken it seriously. Her father had trusted him completely. She typed back with 1 thumb, "Locked in laundry room. He's outside." Then she pressed herself behind the dryer, which she had already dragged in front of the door, something that was significantly harder to do with 1 working arm than she expected, something that had cost her 2 minutes and a level of pain she was already learning to wall off in a separate room of her mind. Her phone lit up. "Stay low. Keep texting. 1 word is fine. We're coming." Grant tried the door handle. Just once, lightly, testing. "I know you're in there," he said. "I can see the light under the door." She turned the phone face down. "I'm not angry," he said. "I want you to understand that. What happened was not who I am. You know who I am. You've known me for 2 years. 1 moment, 1 terrible moment does not define a person. Brooke." He had given variations of this speech before. Smaller stakes, smaller incidents. She had accepted them. Not because she was naive, at least. That was what she told herself, but because accepting them had been the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance in that house always felt, at first, like the safe one. She hadn't understood until very recently that the path of least resistance was a leash. She typed, "Still here." Wade replied, "Good, keep doing that. Every few minutes. One word." "Okay," she typed. She sat with her back against the washing machine, her broken arm cradled against her chest, and she listened to the rain and to Grant's footsteps moving away from the door and then coming back, and she thought about her father. She thought about the red toolbox he'd kept in the back of his shop, the one with the combination lock that only she and Nora knew, and she thought about the night he'd explained the combination to Brooke, sitting on the tailgate of his truck, and he'd said, "You keep the things that matter somewhere safe. Not because you expect something to go wrong, because you love something enough to protect it." She had been hiding things in a red toolbox of her own for 6 months. Not literally, her memory card was in the actual toolbox at her mother's shop, but the idea of it. The photographs, the copied records, the timeline she'd been writing in a notebook she kept tucked inside a veterinary manual that Grant would never open, labeled Bovine Reproductive Disorders, 3rd edition. She had almost convinced herself she was overreacting. Then Grant twisted her arm. "Still here," she typed. 15 minutes out, Wade replied. She heard the sound she had been dreading, the scrape of metal on metal, the sound of a key. She pressed her back into the wall. She gripped the phone. She thought about her father's voice, not any particular thing he'd said, just the texture of it, the way it had always made any room feel slightly safer just by being in it. And she held on that the way you hold on to something in water. The key entered the lock. And from somewhere outside, 30 miles away but closing the distance, 12 motorcycles accelerated through a wall of mountain rain. Wade Dalton had made a promise to a dying man, and he had never once imagined what it would actually look like to keep it. He had thought about it sometimes late nights, the kind where your mind goes somewhere, you don't invite it, and he had figured it would be something he could handle straightforwardly, something with clear lines, someone stranded on a road, someone who needed a ride or a phone call or a bail bond. Not this, not a broken arm at midnight, and a locked door, and a man whose family name was on the hospital wing across town. He rode at the front of the column. Behind him, he could hear Decker and Loomis and Ray Brennan and 8 more men he had known for years. Some of them most of his adult life. All of them riding into a storm without a single question. That was the thing people never understood about these men. They assumed the worst and kept assuming it regardless of what they saw. What Wade knew, what he had known for 30 years, was that these people who showed up, full stop. You called, they came. That was the only credential that mattered. He called Lena Ortiz at 12:04 a.m. She answered on the second ring. "Wade, I know it's late. I know why you're calling. Talk." He told her everything, the text, the address. "Grant Mercer." She was quiet for 6 seconds. "Mercer," she said. And the way she said it told Wade she already had a file with that name in it. "You know him. I know of his foundation. I have had a low-level flag on it for 4 months. Irregular expense categories. Vendor names that don't match active businesses. Nothing actionable yet." She paused. "Are you certain about the source of the text?" "It came through Patrick Callahan's emergency relay. I've had that number for 3 years. Patrick's daughter is the only person who would have known to send to it." Another pause. "I'm getting dressed," Lena said. "Do not go onto that property." "I know." "Wade, I mean it. You are witnesses and backup. You are not enforcement." "I know." "Lena, make sure your people know." He relayed it to the group on their comms. He heard Ray Brennan say, "Understood," in the flat, serious voice Ray used when he was done joking around. Ray had a daughter Brooke's age. Wade had seen his face when Wade read him the text. 12 riders. 11 miles to go. Rain hard enough to drown out everything but the engines. Back in the laundry room, Brooke heard the key. Then a soft, slow click, the kind a lock made when it was turning. The dryer was not going to hold. She knew that. It was wedged at an angle, and the door opened inward, and a man who was 6'2" and not injured was on the other side of it. She had been thinking very clearly since the moment she locked this door. Clearer, possibly, than she had thought in 2 years. Pain had a way of burning through fog. She understood exactly what was happening, and she understood exactly what the options were. And she understood that of all the options available to her, one of them was better than the rest. She opened the voice memo app on her phone. She pressed record. Then she said, in a voice that was steady, she was proud of that it was steady Grant. I'll open the door. The pressure on the door stopped. I'll open the door, she said again, and I want to talk. A beat. Then, come on. Then, she moved the dryer, not far, just enough. She opened the door. He was standing in the hallway, arms at his sides, face composed. He looked at her arm. She watched something move through his eyes, not guilt. Not exactly, something more calculated than guilt. And he said, we need to get you to a hospital. I know, she said. I'll call Dr. Whitmore. That's fine, he relaxed. That was the slight drop in his shoulders. The breath that meant he thought he had control of the room again. She had watched him do it 100 times and never understood what she was seeing. She understood now. Tell me about Clifton, she said. The relaxation stopped. The wire transfers, she said. The ones from the foundation operating account. The ones that go to the 3 holding companies and then disappear. Tell me about those. His face went through 3 expressions in under 2 seconds. She had learned over 2 years to read his face the way you read weather, not because she wanted to, but because she'd had to. The first expression was surprise. The second was calculation. The third was something she had no name for, something cold and very deliberate. Where did you get that, he said. Not a question. A demand with a question mark accidentally attached. Tell me, she said. Tell me about your father's involvement. Tell me how long it's been running. Tell me whose money it was before it was yours. You don't know what you're talking about. I know about the invoices. I know about the 7 women who filed complaints that went nowhere. I know that the employment records from my clinic job were altered. I know, Grant. He stepped toward her. The phone is recording, she said. Don't. He stopped. This was the moment she would understand later, recounting it for Detective Ortiz in a conference room with bad coffee and a voice recorder on the table. This was the moment Grant Mercer made the mistake that ended him. He looked at the phone. He looked at her, and he decided that she was bluffing, because she always had before. Because every time she had pushed back small, soft, terrified pushes, things he'd been ashamed to call resistance afterward, he had pushed harder, and she had folded. He had taught her to fold. He had been very patient about it. He decided she was doing it again. The money, he said, voice low and even. The voice of a man explaining something to someone who wasn't quite following, goes through Clifton's firm, through 2 holding companies my father set up in 2019, and gets reinvested in the development projects. It's been running since the foundation launched. Nobody at the county level is going to touch it, because my father and Hargrove have been doing business for a decade. He said it the way people say things when they know they won't be believed, when they know they are untouchable. The complaints from those women, he continued, almost conversationally now, coming closer, went to a deputy sheriff who has worked for my father's company as a security consultant since 2018. They didn't go anywhere because I made sure they didn't go anywhere. And your employment records, he reached for the phone. Brooke pulled it back. Are whatever I need them to be, he finished. Because I own the records management system for 3 county agencies. I have since 2021. He reached for the phone again. This time, he got it. Except he didn't. Because Brooke was not holding the phone. The phone was in the breast pocket of her flannel shirt, and what she had pulled back from him was her good hand, the empty one. And what was actually happening was that the phone had been recording the entire conversation and transmitting it in real time to Wade Dalton's emergency relay, and had been doing so for the past 4 minutes. Because she had found the live share feature in Wade's app and turned it on before she opened the laundry room door. Grant realized this. He realized it because his phone buzzed. then buzzed again, then buzzed a third time in rapid succession. He pulled it out and looked at the screen and went very still. "That's your father's lawyers," Brooke said. "Or maybe it's your deputy friend. Or maybe it's the notification that you should probably look out the window right now." He looked. 12 motorcycles, headlights cutting through the rain, had pulled to a stop at the edge of the property line. And behind them, still a mile out, 2 sets of emergency lights were moving up the mountain road. Grant turned back to her. The calculation was gone from his face. What was there instead was something she had never seen on him before. And she understood, with a calm that surprised her, that it was fear. "You don't understand what you've just done," he said. "I do," Brooke said. "That's why I did it outside." The motorcycle engines idled. The rain hammered the roof. And from the top of the driveway, the first patrol car turned in through the gate the county deputy, arriving ahead of everyone else, whose name was Ellis, and whose name was already in one of Grant Mercer's contact lists, and whose response to what he was about to see was already, somewhere in the future, going to become its own kind of problem. But that was the next 30 minutes. In this moment, Brooke Callahan stood in a hallway with a broken arm and a recording on her phone and the sound of engines that her father would have recognized, and she did not move from where she was standing. She had stopped waiting to be saved. She had started doing the saving herself. Deputy Ellis pulled his cruiser to a stop at the top of the driveway, and he sat in it for exactly 47 seconds before he got out. Wade counted. He was standing at the property line with Ray Brennan beside him, both of them with their helmet cameras still running, and he watched that cruiser door the way you watch a coin someone's just flipped, waiting to see what side it lands on. Ellis was mid-40s, thick in the middle, with the particular kind of careful walk that men develop when they're used to being the most important person on a scene. He came down the driveway, took in the 12 motorcycles parked along the road's edge, took in the riders lined up with their cameras rolling, and his first expression was annoyance. Not concern, not urgency, annoyance. "You boys need to back up off this property," he said. "We're on the county road," Wade said. "We haven't moved. This is a domestic disturbance call. There's no need for a crowd." Ray Brennan said quietly, "Is that what it is?" Ellis looked at him. "What, a domestic disturbance? Is that what you're calling it?" "Because we have a text from inside that house that says a woman has a broken arm, and we have 40 minutes of audio. Then I'm going to need you to stop right there," Ellis said. He turned back toward the house. "I'll assess the situation." "We'll wait," Wade said. "We'll be right here, waiting." Ellis didn't answer. He walked toward the front door, and before he got there, it opened, and Grant Mercer came out onto the porch. He came out the way a man comes out of his own front door when he's expecting company, relaxed, hands loose at his sides, already shaping the story, before Ellis had taken 3 steps. Wade watched them talk. He couldn't hear it from where he was, but he didn't need to hear it. He knew what it looked like. He had seen it before, in different forms, in different places. A man with a story that fits the available facts still, delivered to someone who has reason to believe it. Before anyone else gets a word in, his phone buzzed. One word from Brooke, "He's on the porch." Wade typed back, "We see him. Stay inside. Paramedics are 4 minutes out." Another buzz. "Ellis is listening to him." "I know. Keep recording. Don't open the door for anyone but the paramedics." He looked up. Ellis had his notepad out. Grant was gesturing not wildly, not defensively the way a guilty man gestures. Slowly, explanatory. The way a reasonable man explains a misunderstanding to a reasonable officer. Ray said under his breath. "He's walking him right into it." "Yeah," Wade said. "You think Ellis already knows him?" Wade thought about what Brooke had said on the recording. "The deputy sheriff, who has worked for my father's company as a security consultant since 2018. He hadn't said that part out loud to the group yet. He was going to have to. "Probably," Wade said. Ray made a sound that wasn't a word. He pulled out his phone and started typing. Lena Ortiz picked up on the first ring this time. Wade could hear road noise in the background, a car moving fast. "Where are you?" he said. 40 minutes, maybe 35. Her voice had the clipped quality of someone doing three things at once. Talk to me about Ellis. He got here before State. He went straight to Mercer. They're talking on the porch. Mercer has been out there 6 minutes, and the deputy hasn't asked to see the woman yet. Silence. Lena, I heard you. More silence. Then his name show up in anything she said on the recording? She said, Grant's father has a deputy on payroll as a security consultant, 2018 to present. She didn't say Ellis specifically. I have 2 names connected to the Mercer family security account, Lena said. I'm going to check the roster against the responding unit right now. You keep your people at the line, and you keep those cameras on. Already doing it, Wade. When I get there, I know. You take the scene. You understand why? I understand. Doesn't mean I like it. You don't have to like it. A pause. Is she still responding? He looked at his phone. Brooke had sent 2 more words in the last 30 seconds. Still inside, then scared. She's responding, Wade said. Good. Lena's voice dropped half a note, which was as much emotion as she let through when she was working. Keep her responding. He hung up and typed to Brooke, You're doing the right thing. Stay on the phone with us. We're not going anywhere. The response took 20 seconds. Then he told Ellis I fell. I can see them through the window. Wade read it and passed it to Ray without a word. Ray read it and passed his phone to Decker behind him. Within 30 seconds, all 12 of them knew. Nobody moved. Nobody said anything loud. But there was a quality to the silence that changed a tighten, the way a rope tightens when you put weight on it, and Wade knew, without looking around, that every man behind him was making the same calculation he was. The line between witness and something else was not a wide line. It was a choice you made every few seconds, and he was going to keep making it the right way, because that was what this required. He typed to Brooke, Does he have your phone? No, he tried. I moved. Good. Is the recording still running? A long pause. Then, yes. Wade let out a breath. On the porch, Ellis finished writing something in his notepad, and he looked toward the road, and for a moment, he and Wade locked eyes across the distance and the rain. Ellis held it for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked away first. Wade noted that. Grant guided Ellis inside, and the door closed, and Brooke's next text came through 10 seconds later. They're inside. He's bringing Ellis to me. Stay calm. Say your name, the time, and what happened. In that order. That's all. What if Ellis sides with him? Wade looked at the helmet cameras on his men. He looked at the 2 sets of headlights, still coming up the mountain road. Paramedics now. Not state police, but close enough. He looked at his own phone, where 42 minutes of audio were already backed up to a cloud account he'd set up specifically for situations where phones got confiscated. Then Ellis has a very bad month, he typed, and every second of it will be on camera. Inside the house, Brooke put her phone in her shirt pocket, screen down, and she waited. She heard them coming down the hallway. Grant first, she knew his footsteps, had learned them the way you learn the sounds of a house you live in, the particular weight and rhythm of them, and Ellis behind. Shoes harder on the wood, a stranger's gait. Grant opened the door of the room where she'd been sitting since she came in from the hallway. He looked at her arm and then at her face, and his expression was deeply, carefully concerned. He had turned it on like a switch. She watched him do it. Brooke, he said, this is Deputy Ellis. He's here to help figure out what happened. She looked at Ellis. He was looking at her arm, and something crossed his face, something involuntary. A quick recoil at the angle of it, and then it was gone, and he had his professional face back on. Ma'am, he said. Can you tell me what happened? My fiancé broke my arm, Brooke said. He grabbed me above the wrist and twisted it. I heard it break. I locked myself in the laundry room after. Grant's carefully constructed concern didn't shift. He was good. She had always known he was good. Brooke, he said, gently, that's not exactly I know what happened to my arm, she said. Ellis wrote something in his notebook. Was there an argument prior to the injury? I confronted him about money stolen from the Veterinary Relief Fund. He demanded my phone. When I refused, he grabbed my arm. It was an accident, Grant said. We were both upset. She pulled away, and I didn't mean to grip that hard. I've been trying to tell her. There are invoices on my phone, Brooke said. keeping her eyes on Ellis. Falsified dates, altered vendor names, wire transfers to shell companies. His recorded confession is also on the phone. He told me himself, less than an hour ago, how the money was moved and whose help he used to keep it hidden. Ellis stopped writing. He looked up. She's been under a great deal of stress, Grant said. There's actually a medical evaluation on file, Dr. Whitmore documented. Dr. Whitmore works for the Mercer Foundation, Brooke said. He is employed by the same organization that Grant controls. That document was produced by someone Grant pays. Silence. Ellis looked at Grant. Grant looked at Brooke. Brooke looked at Ellis. Deputy, she said, I have a broken arm. The paramedics will document it. I have a recording. I have financial records. I have 6 months of documented evidence stored in a location outside this house. What you choose to do with what I'm telling you right now will also be on record because the writers outside have been running cameras since they arrived. And a state investigator is approximately 25 minutes from this location. Ellis's pen had stopped moving. Grant said, There's no need to Grant. Ellis said it quietly, but he said it. Grant stopped. Ellis looked at Brooke's arm again. He looked at it. The way men look at things when they're trying to decide whether the thing is real or constructed, whether they can find an angle that makes it something else. She watched him try. She watched him fail. A broken arm was a broken arm. It hung the way broken things hung. I'm going to step outside, Ellis said. He put his notepad away. The paramedics are here. He left the room. Grant waited until his footsteps faded, and then he crossed the room in 2 steps and stood close enough that she could smell the wine from dinner still on him. And he said, low and even and very clear, You have no idea what my father can do to you. I know exactly what your father can do, she said. I've been documenting it for 6 months. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back. And then, because Grant Mercer was above all things, a man who understood when a position had become untenable and needed to be abandoned in favor of a new one, he straightened his jacket and walked out of the room. The paramedics came in 2 minutes later. The woman who came through the door first had dark hair pulled back and steady hands and the practiced, zero-nonsense energy of someone who had seen a lot and stopped being surprised by most of it. Her name tag said Riaz. She looked at Brooke's arm and said, Okay, let's see what we're working with. And she touched it so carefully and precisely that Brooke felt something come loose in her chest, some wire that had been pulled tight for the last 2 hours, and she had to breathe through her nose for a moment to keep her face from doing something she didn't intend. This is a fracture, Reyes said. She looked up. This did not happen in a fall. No, Brooke said. It didn't. I'm going to need you to tell me exactly what happened, and I'm going to document it, word for word. Everything you say goes in my report. I know. Reyes looked at her steadily. Good. Outside, Ellis was standing at the edge of the porch, talking into his radio, and Wade could hear enough of it through the rain to know that the story Ellis was filing was going to describe a domestic incident with an accidental injury, possible emotional instability, no signs of criminal intent. He could hear it before Ellis even started talking. He had been in enough of these moments to know how they went, how quickly a narrative got locked in, how hard it was to reopen once the first report was filed. He typed to Lena, Ellis is radioing in. It's going to be the false story. Her response was immediate. I'm 12 minutes out. Tell me the moment he transmits. He kept his phone up and watched Ellis, and he felt Ray Brennan step up beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. And Ray said, quietly, What are we doing? We're witnessing, Wade said. And if he files it wrong, then it's wrong on tape. And Lena fixes it in 12 minutes. He paused. We don't touch it. Ray was quiet for a moment. Patrick would have gone through. That Patrick was a single man with no legal exposure. Wade looked at the cameras on their helmets. We are 12 men on camera in a county where Grant Mercer's family has been buying influence for 20 years. We do this right. Ray nodded. It took him a second, but he nodded. The second ambulance had arrived now, and a county fire unit behind it. The scene was getting crowded. More lights, more bodies, more people with clipboards and radios. And in the middle of all of it, Grant Mercers was standing near the porch steps, composed and cooperative and helpful, answering questions in the tone of a man who was deeply sad about what had happened and deeply committed to making sure everyone had what they needed. Wade watched him and thought about something Patrick had once said about reading people. They'd been at the shop, late, working on an engine that was giving them trouble, and Patrick had said, "The most dangerous person in any room is the one who's always the most reasonable." Because reasonable-sounding people make everyone else feel like they're the problem. He'd been talking about a customer dispute at the time, but Wade had never forgotten it. His phone buzzed. Lena Ellis's name is on the Mercer Security Consulting payroll. 2019 to present. I have the account records. Wade read it twice. Then he read it to Ray. Ray said, "So he was never going to help her. Never. And he got here first." Yeah. Wade looked at the porch. That wasn't an accident either. He thought about that. He thought about how fast Ellis had arrived, faster than state police, faster than paramedics, exactly fast enough to be the first authority figure on scene. He thought about whether that was standard response time for this part of the county at midnight, and he thought about the answer, which was that it was not. His phone buzzed again. Not Lena Brooke. The paramedic says it's a fracture. She's documenting. Good. Is the recording still active? Yes. She asked what happened and I told her everything. She wrote all of it down. Wade let himself breathe. Then Lena Ortiz, from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, is 11 minutes out. She is going to take control of the scene. Do not let anyone take your phone until she does. Grant's outside. He's talking to someone on his phone. I know, we can see him. Wade. He looked at the screen and waited. He said his father can make all of this go away. He said it to my face. Wade looked at the porch. Grant had his back to the road now, phone pressed to his ear, one hand moving in the air in front of him, the gesture of a man giving instructions, not receiving them. His posture was still confident, still controlled. His father is going to try. Wade typed back. That's why Lena is coming. And that's why we've been recording for 2 hours. The response took almost a minute. My dad used to say, "You were the most stubborn man he ever knew." Wade stared at that for a moment. He felt something tighten in his throat that he was not going to acknowledge in any detail. He told me that too. He typed back. He said it like it was a compliment. It was. He put his phone in his jacket pocket. He looked at Ray. Ray was watching the porch. Decker and Loomis and the others were spread along the road, cameras up, nobody speaking, rain on their jackets and their helmets and their hands. 8 minutes. Grant finished his call. He turned toward the road, and he looked at the riders for a long moment, and Wade could see him processing, calculating what they represented, what they had recorded, how much it was already too late to contain. He watched the calculation happen on Grant's face in real time, and he watched the moment when Grant realized the calculation wasn't coming out in his favor. Grant went back inside. Ellis came off the porch and started walking toward Wade, and Wade straightened up and waited. "I'm going to need you to move your vehicles back," Ellis said. "You're obstructing sight lines for the emergency units." Wade looked at the road. There was clear space on both sides. "We're not obstructing anything. I'm telling you to move. We'll move when the state investigator tells us to move. She's 8 minutes out." Wade looked at Ellis directly. "How long have you been doing security consulting for Calvin Mercer's company?" The silence lasted 4 full seconds. Ellis said, "Excuse me? I'm asking as a matter of public record. We're on camera. You're on camera. I want it noted that I asked the question." Wade kept his voice level. "How long have you been on the Mercer payroll?" Ellis's jaw tightened. "You are interfering with an active scene. I'm standing on a public road asking a public official a question." Wade held the eye contact. "You filed a report tonight. Whatever you put in that report is going to matter a great deal in about 7 minutes. Ellis stared at him. Something was working behind his eyes, not guilt. Exactly, but something adjacent to it. The particular calculation of a man who has just understood that the information available to the other side is more complete than he assumed. He turned around and walked back toward the house. Ray exhaled through his nose. That went well. He knows we know, Wade said. That's all we needed. His phone went off. Not a text. A call. Area code 303 Denver, he answered. This is Wade Dalton, Mr. Dalton, a woman's voice, quick and precise. I'm Laura Shen. I'm an attorney with the state AG's office. I've been patched into this situation through Detective Ortiz's office. I need to ask you a few questions about the audio recording you received tonight. Wade stepped away from the group. Ask. The recording was transmitted to you in real time? Live share. She activated it before she opened the door. And you have the full audio backed up. Cloud account. I set it up 3 years ago for exactly this kind of situation. The backup is timestamped. The account is registered to my name and address. And I have the access credentials available for law enforcement on request. A pause. Mr. Dalton, I need to tell you that what you've described, the financial disclosures on that recording, if they hold up, we may be looking at a federal matter, not just a county case. Wade looked at the house. I figured. The Mercer Foundation has federal grant recipients in 3 states. If the shell company structure is what the woman described, then it's not just stolen charity money, Wade said. It's federal fraud, potentially. Yes. Another pause. Don't let anyone take that audio. Nobody's taking it. Detective Ortiz will be on scene in 6 minutes, I know. He hung up, turned back to Ray, who had been watching his face while he talked. Federal, Ray said maybe. Ray was quiet for a moment. Then he said, so this is bigger than a broken arm. This was never just a broken arm, Wade said. His phone buzzed. Brooke. Someone's trying to get the paramedic to leave. Grant is telling her he can drive me to the hospital himself. Wade was already moving toward the porch when Ray grabbed his arm. Wade, he's trying to get her out of here before Lena arrives. I know. But you can't. I'm not going on the property. Wade pulled out his phone and called Brooke directly. She answered on the second ring, and he could hear voices in the background, Grant's and the paramedics, overlapping and tense. Don't let them take you in his car, Wade said. Tell the paramedic you're requesting ambulance transport. That's your right. Say exactly that. He heard her breathe. Then her voice. Away from the phone, I'm requesting ambulance transport. That's my right as a patient. Grant's voice in the background. Brooke, that's completely unnecessary, the paramedic's voice. Flat and professional, sir. Step back. She's made her request. Wade stood at the property line and listened, and he could hear the rain and the engines idling and the distant sound of a car coming fast up the mountain road, headlights sweeping the tree line. Lena Ortiz. He heard Brooke breathing on the phone. He heard Grant say something he couldn't make out. He heard the paramedic say firmly, sir, I will not tell you again. Wade, Brooke said into the phone, very quietly. I'm here. She's not letting him near me. Good, he looks. She stopped. He looks like he just realized something. Yeah, Wade said. I think he did. What Grant Mercer had just realized it would come out later, in depositions and in the transcript of his own lawyer's frantic phone call to him, made 40 minutes after this moment, was that the sequence of events had already moved beyond the point where he could reshape them. The recording existed in a cloud account he didn't have access to. The paramedic's report existed in a medical system he didn't control. The 12 cameras on the road were recording everything in real time and backing it up to accounts he had no access to. Detective Ortiz was arriving with state authority that superseded Ellis, and the attorney from the AG's office was already on record as having spoken to Wade Dalton. He had spent years building a system in which every piece of information that touched his life passed through some mechanism he controlled. He had built it slowly, carefully, without ever calling it what it was. He had called it efficiency. He had called it management. He had called it protecting what they'd built. What he had actually built was a cage. He had just been on the inside of it all along and never noticed. Lena's car pulled to the top of the driveway. She got out and she was already holding her badge and moving, and the first person she walked to was not Wade, not Grant, not Ellis. It was Brooke Callahan, sitting on the back of the paramedic's rig with her arm in a temporary splint and her phone in her good hand and her eyes clear. Lena crouched down in front of her. Wade couldn't hear what she said, but he watched Brooke's face when she said it. And something happened there, not relief. Exactly, because relief implied that the worst was over, and they were nowhere near the worst being over, but something like recognition. The recognition of a person who has been screaming into a room and has finally found someone who heard them. Ellis was still on the porch. Lena looked at him once on her way past and said something in 3 words. He stepped back. He did not argue. She came to the property line and looked at Wade and said, without any preamble, "Tell me what you have." Wade told her. All of it. The text, the timing, the live share, the recording duration, the cloud backup, the call from Laura Shen, Ellis's arrival time, the behavior on the porch. He told her straight through without stopping, and Lena listened without interrupting. And when he finished, she said, "Good." And then she said, "You and your people stay on the road." "Yes." "The cameras stay running." "Yes." She looked at him for a moment. Not at the jacket, not at the cuts on his hands from the cold and the rain. At his face. Patrick would have, she started. "He'd have gone through the door," Wade said. "Yeah." Something moved through her expression. "I know." She looked back at the house. "This is better." She went back onto the property, and she took the scene apart, and she put it back together the way it was supposed to be, piece by piece, which was the only way real things ever got fixed. Behind Wade, Ray Brennan said, "It's going to be okay." Wade said, "Not yet. But it's going in that direction." He looked at the house. He thought about a promise he'd made in a hospital room 3 years ago, holding a dying man's hand. He thought about how he'd wondered, over those 3 years, whether the promise would ever get tested, whether he'd been ready for it. "Yeah," he said. "It's going in that direction." His phone buzzed. "Brooke, he's inside." Lena has him separated from Ellis. She's asking him questions. "Good," Wade typed. He told her, "I'm unstable." He used that word, like it was a diagnosis. He doesn't get to diagnose you. 30 seconds. I know that now. 45 seconds. Wade. She found something in his phone. I can see her face. She found something. He gripped his phone. He looked at Ray. Ray looked back. "What is it?" he typed. The reply came slowly, like Brooke was reading something, processing it while she typed. "There are messages between him and Ellis from 2 hours before Ellis arrived tonight. Grant texted him where I was, what I had found, and what story to file when he got here." Wade read it once. "He ready," he said. "What?" Ellis didn't respond to a call tonight. He turned and looked down the road at the county deputy standing near his car, waiting to find out how badly his night was about to get. "Grant called him before I did." The rain didn't let up. The engines idled. And somewhere inside that house, Grant Mercer sat across from a state investigator who had his phone in her hand and 3 years of patience and a file that had just gotten significantly heavier, and for the first time in a very long time, he had nothing left to manage. Lena Ortiz did not raise her voice once during the 40 minutes she spent inside that house. Wade knew this because Brooke's phone was still transmitting, and what came through was not shouting, not the kind of confrontation people imagined when they pictured a state investigator walking into a scene like this. What came through was something more unsettling than shouting. It was the sound of a very precise person taking a room apart one question at a time. Grant answered in the beginning. That was the thing about men like him. They always answered in the beginning, because they had spent so long being the smartest person in any given room that they had confused confidence with invulnerability. He answered calmly, with the kind of measured cooperation that was really just control wearing a different jacket. He said he was happy to help. He said he was concerned about Brooke's well-being. He said the evening had been deeply upsetting for both of them. Lena said, "Tell me about Clifton." The transmitting audio caught the silence that followed. 4 seconds of it. Wade counted. Ray was standing next to him at the road's edge, and he heard it too, and he glanced at Wade without saying anything. The silence said more than Grant's answer would. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," Grant said finally. "Clifton Reese," Lena said. "Denver, Financial Services. You have 47 text exchanges with him in the last 90 days. I'm looking at your phone right now." Brooke's text came through at the same moment. She has everything. Wade typed back, stay where you are. Don't move. Inside, Grant said, I'd like to call my attorney. That's your right, Lena said. Make the call. I'll wait. The sound of a call being dialed. Wade looked at his watch. It was 1:17 in the morning. Grant's attorney was going to be awake, because Grant's attorney had almost certainly already been called by Calvin Mercer, who had almost certainly already been called by Grant, who had made that porch phone call an hour ago, with the deliberate calm of a man who believed he had an infrastructure capable of absorbing any impact. He was about to find out how much of that infrastructure was still standing. Ellis was sitting in his patrol car. He had not left, Lena had told him, in exactly 3 words, that he was not to leave, and he had not spoken to anyone since. Through the windshield, Wade could see him looking at his own phone. And he had the posture of a man who had already done the math and found the answer unpleasant. Decker came up on Wade's left. State police just pulled off the highway, he said. 10 minutes. Good. Ellis know they're coming? He knows. Decker was quiet for a moment. He was the youngest of the group, 34. And he had been riding with Wade's chapter for 6 years. He had come out tonight without knowing anything beyond 3 words on a group text. He had ridden 30 miles through rain without asking a single question. Wade had noticed that. He noticed it about all of them, every time. She going to be okay? Decker said. Wade looked at the ambulance rig where Brooke was still sitting. Reyes beside her, both of them visible through the open rear doors. Brooke was not looking at her phone. She was looking at the house, and her face was the face of someone who had already decided something and was waiting for the world to catch up to the decision. Yeah, Wade said. She's going to be okay. His phone buzzed. Not Brooke this time. An unknown number. Colorado Springs area code. He answered. Dalton, he said. Mr. Dalton. Male voice. Older, smooth. The kind of smooth that cost money to develop. My name is Warren Pruitt. I represent Calvin Mercer. I'm calling as a professional courtesy to let you know that what is happening tonight is a significant misunderstanding, and that my client would appreciate it if Mr. Pruitt, Wade said, I'm going to stop you there. This call is being recorded. Everything tonight is being recorded. If you have something to say to anyone involved in this situation, I'd suggest you say it to Detective Lena Ortiz of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, who is currently inside the property. He paused. And I'd suggest you say it quickly, because the state police are 8 minutes out. A beat. I see, Pruitt said. Good night, Wade said, and hung up. Ray raised an eyebrow. Wade shook his head once. Not now. Inside the house, Grant had finished his call. When Lena's voice came back through the audio, she said simply, Ready? My attorney advises me not to answer further questions tonight. That's fine. The sound of movement. Papers. I want to show you something. A pause. These are financial records from the Mercer Foundation's operating account, specifically the vendor payments from January 2022 through last month. Do you recognize these transactions? I'd like my attorney present before. I'm not asking you to explain them. I'm asking if you recognize them. Silence. Your name is on the authorization signatures, Lena said. Both your name and your father's. More silence. And then Grant's voice, quieter now, the careful tone beginning to fray at its edges. Where did you get those? We've had a flag on your foundation's financials for 4 months. Mr. Mercer, what happened tonight accelerated our timeline. A brief pause. But these records didn't come from our office. Brooke's text arrived at that exact moment. Wade. She's showing him the records from the toolbox. How does she have those? I didn't, Mom. Wade read it and understood before he finished the sentence. He called Nora Callahan. She answered in 2 rings, and the sound behind her was a shop, the particular acoustic texture of a concrete floored space with metal in it, tool sounds, a light humming. Nora, he said. I know, she said. I already opened it. When? 30 minutes ago. You called me from the road. I went straight to the shop. Her voice was steady, but he knew Nora, had known her for 20 years, and underneath the steadiness was something that took effort. Wade, the things in that box. What Brooke put together, she's been building this for 6 months. There are records in here going back 3 years. Photographs, invoices, bank transfers, printed emails, a handwritten timeline. And there's a list. She stopped for a moment. 7 names. 7 women. With dates. Wade turned away from the road so the others couldn't see his face. Okay. What do I do with it? You call the number I'm about to send you, he said. Her name is Laura Shen, State AG's office. You tell her you're Patrick Callahan's widow and you have physical evidence related to an active investigation. She'll know what to do, a beat. Then Nora said, Patrick knew, didn't he? Not about Grant specifically, but he knew something wasn't right about that family. I think he trusted his daughter's instincts, Wade said, even when she didn't trust them herself. Nora was quiet for a long moment. Then send me the number. He did. He turned back to the road. Ray was watching him. Nora has the box, Wade said. Ray closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them. Okay, the list has 7 names, 7. Ray said it like it weighed something. Yeah, the state police arrived at 1:29 a.m., 2 units, 4 officers, and they went straight to Lena when she came out to meet them. And there was a 10-minute conversation at the edge of the driveway that Wade couldn't hear and wasn't meant to. He watched it happen. He watched Lena's posture straight, measured, controlled, and he watched the officers nod. And he watched one of them make a call, and he watched the call last approximately 90 seconds. Federal. He could feel it in the pattern of what was happening, the way you could sometimes feel weather before it arrived. This was moving up the chain faster than a county assault case moved. That meant what was on Brooke's phone, what was in the cloud backup, what Nora had just found in a red toolbox in a motorcycle shop. It was connecting to something that had already been in motion somewhere else. Brooke texted, "They're going to arrest him." Then, I think. Lena came out and talked to someone, and then she went back in, and she's not letting him leave the room. Wade typed, "Is the paramedic still with you?" "Yes, stay with her. Don't move until Lena comes to you directly." 3 minutes passed. 5. The rain had gone from heavy to something steadier and colder, the kind that settled in and didn't apologize for itself. Wade's jacket was soaked through. He hadn't noticed until now. Decker brought a thermos of coffee from his bike's SAP's saddlebag and passed it down the line without a word. It came to Wade last, and he drank from it and handed it back and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying. These were men who understood what it meant to stand somewhere uncomfortable for as long as it took. They had all done it before, in different circumstances, for different reasons. The reasons were always the same underneath. Because someone needed them to be there. Because leaving would be its own kind of answer. Then the front door opened, and Lena came out, and behind her were 2 state officers, and between them was Grant Mercer. He was in handcuffs. He came down the porch steps with the careful, upright posture of a man who had decided that if he could not control what was happening, he would control how he looked while it happened. His jaw was set. His face was composed. He did not look toward the road. He didn't have to. He knew they were there. One of the officers guided him toward the patrol unit, and Lena was already on her phone. And for a moment, everything on that property was noise and movement and the specific kind of controlled chaos that happens when a situation that has been building for years finally breaks the surface. Brooke texted, "He's in handcuffs." "I see him," Wade typed. "Is it real?" He looked at the patrol car. Grant was being guided into the back seat, still upright, still composed, and for one moment, just one, he turned his head and he looked toward the road, and he looked directly at Wade Dalton. Wade held the eye contact. He did not step back. He did not look away. He just stood there, at the property line, in the rain, the way he'd been standing for the last 2 hours. Grant looked away first. "Again, it's real," Wade typed. He was about to put his phone away when another message came through. Not from Brooke, from Lena. "Bring me the audio backup credentials. Now." He went to the property line, and Lena met him there. She had her badge out and her recorder running, and she looked like she had been awake for 20 years, which was something Wade recognized because he probably looked the same. "The cloud account," she said. "Here." He walked her through the access. She confirmed the backup, confirmed the timestamp, forwarded the credentials to 2 separate secure addresses. She did it fast and without hesitation, the way someone moved when they were several steps ahead of everyone else on the scene. The messages between Grant and Ellis, Wade said, "I have them." She didn't look up from her phone. Ellis called in the fall story before he even made contact with Brooke. "I know." She finished what she was doing. "Ellis is suspended as of 40 minutes ago. The sheriff's department has been notified. He surrendered his service weapon at my request." She finally looked up. He cooperated. That's the only thing working in his favor right now. How much was he in it for? We don't know yet. Could be he was just the response guy, get there first. Control the narrative. Could be deeper. She looked toward his cruiser, where Ellis was still sitting. "We'll find out." Wade kept his voice level. "The 7 names on the list." She held his gaze. "We're running them. Nora has the physical records, I know. Laura Shen is on her way to the shop." She paused. "Wade, if what's on that list connects to what I think it connects to, this isn't just a county case," Laura told me. "Federal. Potentially 3 states." She said it carefully, the way you said something when you were still deciding how real it was. The foundation had federal grants. If the shell companies were diverting federally funded money, then Calvin Mercer is not going to be able to call this a family misunderstanding. "No," Lena said, "he is not." She went back to the scene. Wade went back to the road. Ray said, "Well, it's going federal." Ray stared at him. "How federal? 3 states maybe." "Foundation money, federal grants, shell companies." Wade looked at the patrol car where Grant sat. "The son arrests tonight." The father, he shook his head. "That's going to take longer, but it's going." Ray was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Patrick built that relay in 2008. Wade looked at him. "The emergency satellite relay. In the house." Brooke said, "It's what got the text out." Ray's voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. The same thing that got underneath all their voices when they talked about Patrick, that particular weight. "He built it in 2008 for wildfire season. He told me about it. Said he was paranoid." A pause. "He never knew it would." "No," Wade said. "He didn't know, but he built it anyway, because he loved something enough to protect it." Wade felt the words land as he said them, recognized them from a different voice in a different time. That's what he told Brooke about the toolbox. Keep the things that matter somewhere safe, not because you expect something to go wrong, because you love something enough. Ray nodded. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The next thing that happened came from inside the ambulance rig, and it was not a text. It was Brooke's voice, and it carried across the cold air clearly enough that 3 of the riders near the ambulance turned toward it. She was arguing. Wade moved, not onto the property he stayed at the line, but close enough to hear. What he heard was Grant's attorney, Warren Pruitt, who had apparently arrived in the last 5 minutes, standing near the ambulance and speaking to Reyes, the paramedic, and trying to explain that he had a medical document signed, notarized, on file with a county health agency, indicating that Brooke Callahan had a documented history of dissociative episodes and that her account of events should be evaluated in that context. He had a manila folder. He was holding it out toward Reyes. Reyes was not taking it. Brooke said from inside the rig, "I want to see that document." Pruitt said, "Miss Callahan, I don't think that's I want to see what you're holding." He hesitated. Then he gave it to her. And Brooke looked at it, and Wade watched her face. And what happened there was not what he expected. He expected anger. He expected fear. What he saw instead was something colder and more useful than either of those. She recognized the signature. "Dr. Alan Whitmore," she said. She said it clearly, loud enough to be heard, which meant it was going on camera. Alan Whitmore is a physician employed by the Mercer Foundation. He attended every major foundation event in the last 2 years. I have photographs of him at 6 separate events with Grant and Calvin Mercer. She looked at the document. This document is dated 14 months ago. I had no medical interactions with Dr. Whitmore at any point. I have never been his patient. I have never signed a release authorizing him to access my health information. She looked up at Pruitt. This is fabricated. Pruitt said, Miss Fabricated, she said again. And this time she said it to the nearest camera, which was Decker's helmet, and Decker held very still, so the frame would be steady. Lena appeared at Wade's shoulder without warning. She had seen it from across the property. She walked to Pruitt, and she held out her hand and she said, I'll take that. Pruitt started to say something about chain of custody and legal privilege. Lena said, Mr. Pruitt, your client is in the back of a state police vehicle. I am the lead investigator on an active case that is currently being referred to the federal level. You can give me that document and we can discuss its provenance in an orderly way, or I can obtain it through other means which will be less convenient for everyone, including your client's father. Pruitt gave her the document. Lena brought it to Wade, held it up. Whitmore. You know the name? Foundation-employed physician. She identified him on the recording 2 hours ago. Wade looked at the document. They had this ready. This wasn't improvised tonight. No, Lena said. It wasn't. She looked at it for another second. This means at some point Grant or his father or both prepared for a scenario in which they might need to discredit her. They prepared for it in advance, and they prepared it with a physician they control, and they filed it with County Health Agency. She looked up. That's not a domestic argument that got out of hand. That's a system. 6 months, Wade said. She told me she'd been documenting for 6 months. She saw it coming. She saw something coming. Lena looked back toward the ambulance. She was more prepared than she knew. The moment that broke something loose in Wade, something he'd been holding together by habit and practice, and the sheer discipline of staying inside the lines came 12 minutes later, and it came quietly, the way the things that matter usually do. Brooke came out of the ambulance on her own feet. Reyes was beside her, and a state officer walked with them. But Brooke was walking, one arm in a sling and the other at her side, and she came down the driveway, and she came to the property line, and she stopped in front of Wade. She looked like her father. She always had, but it hit him differently right now. Something around the eyes, the particular way she held herself when she had decided something. She said, I didn't know if the relay would work. It worked. I didn't even know why I remembered it. I hadn't thought about it in years. And then I was sitting on that floor, and I thought Dad installed something. I remember him talking about it. She stopped. I aimed at Rose's number and just hoped. It found us, Wade said. She looked at him for a moment. He really said that? About answering the call? 3 years ago. Hospital room. 2 days before. Wade held the memory at arm's length, the way you held things that were heavy. He said, if my girl ever calls, don't ask whether it's convenient. Just answer. She didn't respond immediately. She looked at the ground for a moment, and he could see her deciding whether to let something through, the same way he'd seen it 100 times. In people trying to hold themselves together in the middle of a session they hadn't finished processing. She let a little through. Not a lot, just enough. He knew, she said. He didn't know about Grant. But he knew he must have known that something could happen, that I might need. She stopped again. He couldn't protect me himself. So he made sure someone else could. Wade said that's exactly what he did. Behind her, the state officers were sealing the property. Evidence tape. Forensics unit inbound, according to Lena. The house was no longer Grant's house tonight. Maybe not ever again, depending on how the property registration played out with the business account it was held under. Brooke looked at the ambulance, then at Wade. They're taking me to County General. Your mother will meet you there. I called her from the road. Something crossed her face. You called my mom. She asked me to keep her updated. I kept her updated. Brooke exhaled. Not relief, more like the specific sound a person makes when they realize they are less alone than they thought. Tell your people. She looked down the line of riders. 12 men in wet leather standing in the cold. Cameras still running. Tell them I know what they did tonight. Tell them I know it wasn't nothing. They know it wasn't nothing, Wade said. That's enough. She nodded. She started to turn back toward the ambulance, and then she stopped. She said, without turning around, the red toolbox. Mom opened it. I know. The list with the 7 names. I know. Those women, they tried to report things and nothing happened and their names just, she stopped. They're in there. In that box. I couldn't do anything with it while I was in this house, but I kept it. You kept it for 2 years, Wade said. You kept it until it could do something. She turned around then and looked at him straight. Make sure Lena has all 7 names. She's already running them. Brooke nodded once. Then she walked back to the ambulance, and Reyes helped her up, and the doors closed, and it pulled away from the property slowly. No lights or sirens, just a vehicle moving through rain. Ray said from behind Wade, "We staying until it clears?" Wade looked at the scene. Forensics was 20 minutes out. Lena was working. Pruitt was on his phone near his car, making calls that were going to keep him busy until morning. Ellis was still in his cruiser, which was now effectively a holding position. The house had been turned inside out by truth, and it was going to take a long time to put back together not the house, which was just wood and plaster, but everything the house had represented. The story of a generous man in a mountain home. The story of a celebrated family. The story of a foundation that gave money to people who needed it. All of those stories were ending tonight. New ones hadn't started yet. We stay. Nobody moved. Nobody argued. Lena came to the property line one more time, and she held out her hand to Wade, and he shook it, she said. Patrick did good. He always did, Wade said. She looked down the line of riders. 12 men, soaked through, cameras still running, standing in the cold on a public road in the middle of the night because a woman they had never met needed them to be there. So did you, she said. We're not done yet. And they weren't, because in a shop 12 miles down the mountain, Nora Callahan was sitting with a red toolbox open on the workbench and a woman from the state AG's office on the other side of it. And they were going through the contents one item at a time, and each item was another layer of a system that had been running for years underneath the surface of a town that thought it knew itself. And in the back of a state police vehicle, Grant Mercer was making calculations that no longer added up. And in the ambulance heading toward County General, Brooke Callahan was looking at her phone, and the last message on the screen was from Wade, sent 2 hours ago at the start of the worst night of her life. Your father trusted me. Police and paramedics are coming. So are we. Stay away from the door. She had stayed away from the door. She had done something better than that. She had opened it herself, on her own terms, with a recording running and 12 witnesses at the property line and 6 months of evidence in a red toolbox that her father had taught her to keep locked. The siren didn't come on. The ambulance just drove. And Brooke looked out at the rain and thought about the next thing. Not about Grant. Not about the arm, which would need surgery in the morning. Not about the lawyers or the case, the 7 names or the federal investigation that was already opening like a door behind all of this. She thought about what happened after. She thought about who she was going to be when it was done. She didn't have an answer yet, but she was thinking about it, which meant she was already somewhere different than the woman who had locked herself in a laundry room 2 hours ago, hoping that a dead man's phone number still worked. That was something. That was for tonight enough. The surgery took 3 hours and 14 minutes. Nora sat in the waiting room the entire time without touching the coffee Wade had brought her. And when the surgeon came out and said it went clean, she nodded once and pressed her hand flat against her sternum like she was checking whether her heart was still doing its job. Wade sat across from her and watched her do it and didn't say anything because there was nothing that needed saying. They had known each other for 22 years. They had stood in this kind of silence before, in different rooms, for different reasons. Brooke came out of recovery at 6:43 in the morning. Her first words, directed at Nora, were, "Did Lena get the names?" Nora looked at Wade. Wade said, "All 7. AG's office has the originals. Copies are in 4 separate locations." Brooke closed her eyes. "Okay." Then she opened them. "Okay. Good." That was how it started. Not with tears. Not with the kind of collapse people expected after a night like that one. Just a woman in a hospital bed checking the status of evidence before she asked about her own arm. Nora gripped her daughter's good hand and held it and didn't let go for a long time. And Brooke let her, And the two of them sat together in the particular silence of people who have both been terrified for the same reason and come out the other side of it still breathing. The first week was the arm. Surgery, pain management, physical rest. Brooke moved into Nora's house, her childhood home. The one above the motorcycle shop her father had built from nothing, and she slept in her old room and ate whatever Nora put in front of her and did not look at the news. The second week, she started looking at the news. That was a mistake and also completely unavoidable. Grant's legal team had moved fast. They were expensive and coordinated, and they had clearly prepared for a version of this outcome because within 72 hours of the arrest, they had a media strategy running. It was not subtle. A carefully worded statement attributed to a family spokesperson described Grant as a respected community leader whose dedication to Cedar Ridge was being weaponized by a deeply troubled individual in the aftermath of a personal conflict. There were no specifics. There didn't need to be. The language was engineered to plant doubt without making any claim that could be refuted in court. Then came the photographs. Brooke found them on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after she'd started reading the news, when Rosa texted her a link without any message attached. Just the link. Brooke clicked it and looked at what was there for about 45 seconds, and then she put the phone face down on her bed and stared at the ceiling. They were real photographs taken from her phone. She assumed, either cloned before she'd locked the laundry room door or accessed through the cloud account Grant had set up for her when she moved into the house. She hadn't thought about the cloud account. She should have. Pictures of her at events with a glass in her hand, or laughing too hard, or with her eyes not quite focused. All of them real, all of them cropped to remove the context. All of them arranged to support a story about an unstable woman at a charity dinner who'd had too much to drink and invented a crisis. There was a caption under one of them, attributed to an anonymous source close to the Mercer family. She wanted attention. She always wanted attention. He gave her everything, and it was never enough. Brooke read it once. She read it again. And then she did something that surprised her. She picked up the phone and called Lena. Lena answered in 2 rings. I saw it. Where did they get my photos? The iCloud account registered to your email, but set up through Grant's Foundation's IT service. We're pulling the access logs now. Lena's voice was measured. The professional steadiness that Brooke had come to understand was not coldness, but discipline. This helps us. It helps you, yes. Unauthorized access to your personal accounts is a separate criminal charge. Every time they do something like this, they add a count, a pause. Brooke, don't respond publicly. No, I mean it. Any statement you make right now, Lena. Brooke looked at the ceiling. I'm not going to post anything. I want to know how many people saw it. Enough, Lena said, because she was honest, but not as many as they hoped. The local paper ran a piece this morning on the Foundation audit. That's getting more traction. After she hung up, Brooke lay there for a while. She was thinking about something Grant had said to her once, about 8 months into their relationship, when she'd mentioned that a former colleague had reached out to ask how she was doing. He had said, very casually, very reasonably, you know how it looks when you're constantly needing people to check in on you. It makes them worried. It's not fair to them. And she had thought about that for a week afterward. She had thought about whether he was right. She had started to think about calling people less because she didn't want to be a burden, because she didn't want to look like she was constantly needing something. She understood now that that was the first real wall he'd built. Not the moving to the remote house, not the quitting the clinic job. The first wall was the one he'd built inside her, the one that made her believe the people who loved her were better off with less of her. There was a knock on the door. Nora opened it and looked at her. Rosa's here. Brooke felt something tighten in her chest. Okay. Rosa came in and sat in the chair by the bed, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Rosa looked like she hadn't slept well, which was accurate, because she had texted Brooke at 2 a.m. twice in the last week asking if she could come by, and both times Brooke had said not yet. I saw the photos, Rosa said. I know. You sent me the link. I didn't know if you'd seen it and I thought you should hear it from me first instead of she stopped. I'm sorry. I don't know if that was the right call. It was fine. Rosa looked at her hands. She was a small woman with dark hair and a habit of being direct that Brooke had loved about her since they were in their 20s. Right now, the directness was working against her because what she needed to say was something she had been carrying for a long time and hadn't found a way to put down. I noticed things, she said, before. I noticed things and I didn't say them out loud because every time I got close to saying them, you defended him. She looked up, and I chose to respect your choices instead of pushing. And I have been thinking about whether that was the right thing to do or whether I just took the easy way out. Brooke was quiet for a moment. How long did you notice? 8 months in, maybe. The way he answered for you at dinner. The way he'd redirect conversations when they got to things you used to care about. Your job, your friends, me. She stopped. You stopped calling as much. And when I asked about it, you said you were just busy, and I believed you because it was easier than not believing you. Rosa Brooke looked at her. I stopped calling because he told me that needing people was a burden. He said it so gently I didn't even recognize it as something being done to me. I thought I was making a mature decision. She paused. You couldn't have pushed me out of that. I wasn't ready to see it. I know that now. I didn't know what to do with it then. Neither did I. They sat with that for a moment. Then Rosa said, I should have called more. I should have shown up and called more. That's what I should have done. Maybe, Brooke said. But I also should have picked up. She looked at the cast on her arm. This is not your fault. I want you to hear that from me directly. None of this is your fault. Rosa nodded, but it was the nod of someone who was going to carry it for a while regardless. Brooke understood that. She was going to carry for a while too. That was just how it went. I'm here now, Rosa said. Whatever you need. I know, Brooke said. I know you are. The conversation that mattered more, the one Brooke hadn't been able to prepare for, happened 4 days later. In Wade's garage, where she had gone because Lena had asked her to come in and review a piece of the recording with her, and Wade's garage was the neutral ground they'd settled on, halfway between the mountain and town. She arrived to find Wade sitting across from a woman she didn't know, and the woman was crying, quietly, with the specific restraint of someone who had been crying in front of strangers recently and had gotten used to trying to do it without taking up too much space. Wade stood when Brooke came in. Brooke, this is Carla Reyes. Brooke looked at her. The name wasn't one of the 7 on her list. I don't. She's not on the list, Wade said. He said it carefully. She came forward this morning. She saw the article about the foundation audit. She worked for a Mercer-owned property management company from 2020 to 2022. She filed a complaint about financial mismanagement and workplace harassment and was told the complaint was reviewed and dismissed. He paused. She never knew why it was dismissed. She found out 2 days ago. Deputy Ellis's name was on the dismissal paperwork, Carla said. She was looking at her hands. He wasn't a workplace investigator. He had no business touching a private employer complaint. I didn't know that when I filed it. I thought the system worked, and my complaint wasn't strong enough. She looked up at Brooke. I quit the job. I moved. I spent 2 years thinking I'd imagined it. Brooke sat down. You didn't imagine it. I know that now. Carla's voice cracked on the last word and then steadied again. I know because your name is in the news. And I looked it up and I read the recording transcripts and I heard what he said about the complaints that were made to the deputy, and she stopped. I needed to know it was real. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. You're not crazy, Brooke said, and you didn't imagine it. Carla looked at her for a long moment. How do you do that? How are you sitting here 2 weeks later saying that clearly? Brooke thought about the questions seriously. She thought about the answer, which was complicated and not fully formed yet. And she gave the version of it that was truest. Because I have a recording of him saying what he did. Because I had 12 cameras at the property line. Because Lena has a file. Because Wade has a cloud backup. She paused. Because I spent 6 months writing things down when I wasn't sure anyone would ever believe them. And when the moment came, the paper held. She looked at Carla. The reason I can say it clearly is because I made sure I had evidence. Not for me, I knew what was real. For everyone else. I didn't have evidence, Carla said. I know. That's why this matters. What happens now, the investigation, the audit, everything coming out, it's evidence for you retroactively. The system failed you, and what's happening now is the correction. Wade was quiet through all of this, the way he was quiet when he understood that his role was to be present rather than to speak. Brooke had noticed that about him. He knew when the room didn't need him to carry it. Carla left an hour later. She had given her name to Lena's office, added her own account to the growing file. 8 women now. 9, counting Brooke. After she was gone, Wade poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of Brooke and sat back down. He said, "That's going to keep happening. I know. Are you ready for that?" Brooke wrapped her good hand around the mug. "I don't think ready is the right word." I think she stopped, found the language. "I think I understand now that the box in my dad's shop wasn't just about me. I thought I was protecting myself. I was actually protecting evidence that other people needed too." She looked at him. "That changes what it means. What I do next." Wade looked at her steadily. He had the particular quality she'd come to associate with him, of listening in a way that took up the whole room without being loud about it. "What do you do next?" he said. She didn't answer right away, but she was thinking about it. The answer started to take shape 2 weeks later, when the media campaign against her hit its peak and then, unexpectedly, began to collapse. Grant's team released what they called a character file, private messages between Brooke and Grant, edited, pulled from context. They released a second statement from Dr. Whitmore, this one calling into question her credibility as a witness based on what he described as documented emotional fragility. They leaked to 2 local bloggers that the Hells Angels involvement was manufactured to create a sensational story, that Wade Dalton had a criminal history that the media was ignoring, and that Brooke had orchestrated the entire evening to destroy a man she was angry at for ending their engagement. Brooke read all of it. She read it deliberately, the way you read something, when you need to know exactly what the other side is doing. Then she called Detective Ortiz and asked what she could say publicly. Lena said, "You can speak to your own experience. You cannot comment on ongoing case details. Stay factual. Don't engage with the character attacks directly. What about Wade? His record is public. He can speak for himself if he chooses." Wade chose. He gave one interview to a regional newspaper in the parking lot of his garage, and he said 11 sentences. He said he got a text. He said he called 911 first. He said his riders followed every legal boundary. He said they ran cameras. He said they stayed at the property line. He said a state investigator was on scene within 40 minutes. He said the recording and footage were turned over to law enforcement immediately. He said he had one reason for being there. He said that reason was a promise he made to a man he respected. He said he would make the same decision again. The interview ran 4 days later and got more traction than anything the Mercer legal team had released. But the real turn came from Nora. Nora Callahan had not spoken publicly about any of this. She had been at the shop, answering questions from the AG's office, providing access to records, keeping the business running, and taking care of her daughter. She was not a person who sought attention. Patrick had been the one people noticed when they walked in a room. Nora was the one who made the room work. She gave one statement. She released it through the local paper, 3 paragraphs, and she wrote it herself. Wade read it to Brooke the morning it ran because Brooke's hand was shaking too much to hold the phone steady. The statement said, "My daughter spent 6 months collecting evidence of crimes she was not sure anyone would believe her about, in a house she was not free to leave, using tools she taught herself to use quietly. She sent one text to a dead phone number, and it worked because her father loved her enough to build a system that would find help even when she couldn't ask for it directly. I am telling you this because there are people reading what Grant Mercer's lawyers are saying about my daughter and wondering whether to believe it. I am asking you to look at the evidence instead. I am her mother. I know who she is, but you don't have to take my word for it." The recording exists. The documents exist. The medical report exists. The camera footage exists. You are allowed to look at the facts and decide for yourself. When Wade finished reading it, he looked up, and Brooke was looking at the window, and her jaw was set in the particular way it had been set on the porch of that mountain house when she'd stepped away from Grant and said her name and the time and what had happened. "She never told me she was going to do that," Brooke said. "She didn't ask?" "No," a pause, "she just did it." Wade set the phone down. "Like I said, you come by it honestly." Brooke almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. The pivot in the investigation came on a Wednesday, 26 days after the arrest. Brooke was at a follow-up appointment for her arm when her phone went off 4 times in under 2 minutes. She checked it in the waiting room. First text from Lena, "Call me when you're done." Second text from Rosa, "Are you seeing this?" Third text from an unknown number that turned out to be Laura Shen at the AG's office. "Federal charges filed this morning. Calvin Mercer indicted. Call me." Fourth text from Wade, "It went federal." Both of them. She called Lena from the car. "Calvin Mercer was indicted this morning," Lena said. "Wire fraud, conspiracy to obstruct justice, misappropriation of federally funded charitable assets. The indictment covers activity in Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana." She paused. "The foundation wasn't a side project. It was the structure. They built the whole thing around it, the vendor accounts, the shell companies, the records management system Grant controlled. Calvin architected it. Grant ran the operations. Ellis and at least 2 other officials were paid to manage interference." Brooke sat in the parking lot and said nothing for a long moment. "The women," she said, "the 9 of us. The complaints that were dismissed are being reviewed by a separate investigative unit. That's a parallel track. It will take time." A pause. "Brooke, you were not the first person to see what was happening. You were the first person who survived long enough, with enough evidence to break it open." She thought about that. She thought about a woman named Carla who had moved away and spent 2 years thinking she'd imagined things. She thought about the 7 names in her handwriting in the red toolbox. She thought about her father's relay, sitting unused in the wall of a house for 16 years, waiting. "What happens to the foundation money?" she said. "Seized, eventually redirected. That process takes a long time. Honestly, months, maybe longer. But it goes back toward the purposes it was supposed to serve." After she hung up, she sat for a while and thought about what it meant, that the things she'd built in secret, the photographs, the timeline, the copied records had been the thread that, once pulled, had come loose from something much larger than one man's violence on one night. She had known the money was wrong. She had known Grant's behavior was wrong. She had not known that underneath both of those things was a constructed system, decades old, that had been eating other people's lives while Cedar Ridge pinned a philanthropist's ribbon on it. She had pulled the thread without knowing where it went. It had gone a long way. She went back inside for her appointment, and she answered the doctor's questions. And she did the range of motion exercises. And she did not tell the doctor about any of what had just happened, because this hour was about the arm and not everything else. And she had learned over the last month to put things in their correct boxes so that none of them spilled over into the time that was supposed to belong to something different. That was new. She had not known how to do that before. She was learning. The harder conversation came that evening. Wade had asked her to stop by the garage. He had something to give her, he said, which was how he prefaced things when he wanted to avoid sounding like he had something important to say. She went, and Ray Brennan was there, and 2 other riders she recognized from the night on the mountain, and they were all drinking coffee and not quite looking at each other with the particular energy of men who had arranged themselves around something they were waiting to address. She sat down and looked at Wade. "What's happening?" He looked at Ray. Ray looked at his coffee. Wade said, "I need to tell you something about why this mattered to me. Beyond Patrick. Beyond the promise." He stopped, looked at his hands for a moment, then back at her. "I had a sister younger. Her name was Diane." Brooke waited. 15 years ago, she called me. She was in a bad situation. Not physically, not yet, But she called me, and I could hear it in her voice, and I made a decision. He said the word decision, like it had weight and edges. I decided it wasn't my place. I decided she had chosen this person, and it was her life, and I shouldn't interfere. What happened? She got hurt, badly enough to need surgery. Different kind of surgery than yours, but he stopped. She survived. She's alive. We talk twice a year. Maybe. He was quiet for a moment. The distance between us, that's mine. I put that there the night I chose not to answer. Brooke said, carefully, does she know you feel that way? She knows enough. He looked up. I'm not telling you this for absolution. I'm telling you because you said something at the mountain house. You said your dad knew something could happen, and he built a system anyway. And I've been thinking about that because I knew something could happen to Diane, and I chose to believe it wasn't my business. He paused. Helping you wasn't about making that right. You can't make something like that right retroactively. But it was a decision to behave differently now. The room was very quiet, Ray said, without looking up from his coffee. He never told any of us that before tonight. I know, Wade said. Brooke looked at him for a long time. Then she said, you answered. Yeah, that's what there is. That's all there is. She held his gaze. You answered. He nodded once. She understood that this was all he needed, not forgiveness, because it wasn't hers to give, and not validation, because he wasn't asking for it. He just needed to have said it to someone who understood what it cost. She understood. 3 days later, Brooke's first public statement went out through the local paper and a victims advocacy organization that Lena had connected her with. It was not long. She had worked on it for 4 days and cut it down from 11 paragraphs to 4, cutting everything that was about Grant, keeping only what was about what happened and what it meant. She said that a broken arm had started an investigation that uncovered something much larger than one act of violence. She said that the Hells Angels who showed up that night had not rescued her by fighting anyone. She said they had helped by believing her, recording the truth, and refusing to leave. She said that the red toolbox her father built, literal and metaphorical, had held the evidence until there were hands capable of using it. She said, the most important thing I can tell anyone reading this is that the evidence mattered because I survived long enough to use it. Survival is not the same as strength. It is not the same as having done everything right. It is not something you earn. It is something that, if it happens, you take in use. The statement ran. It was shared. It was read by people Brooke would never meet, in places she had never been, and some of them recognized something in it that belonged to them. Rosa texted her, I'm proud of you. Then 30 seconds later, your dad would be losing his mind right now, the best possible way. Brooke laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in 4 weeks, and it surprised her enough that she put her hand over her mouth for a moment. Then she went back to work. Because there was still more to do, and she was the one to do it, and her arm was healing, and she had a red toolbox, and she was starting to understand what it was for. 8 months after the surgery, Brooke still woke up some nights reaching for her left arm. Not from pain, the bone had healed clean. The surgeon had said so, and the physical therapist had signed off 6 weeks prior. She woke up reaching because her body had not yet fully updated its understanding of what was dangerous and what wasn't. The arm was fine. She was fine. But somewhere in the wiring between sleeping and waking, the alarm was still running. She had talked to a counselor about it. The counselor had said that was normal, which Brooke had found simultaneously reassuring and irritating because normal implied there was a timeline, and she was not interested in being told how long her nervous system was supposed to take to catch up with reality. What she had learned in 8 months was to let the reaching happen and then let it stop. To not grab onto it and make it mean something. To lie in the dark for 30 seconds and take inventory arm, fine room, safe door, locked from the inside by her own hand, and then go back to sleep. Most nights she could do that. Most nights she did. The scar on her forearm was thin now. A pale line about 3 inches long where they'd gone in to set the plate. She had stopped covering it at the 4-month mark. Not as a statement she wasn't interested in performing recovery for anyone, But because covering it required a specific kind of attention every morning that she decided was not worth the energy. It was there. It was part of what had happened. It did not belong to Grant's version of her life, which was the only thing that had ever mattered about it. The plea agreement came through on a Thursday. Lena called her directly. Grant took the deal, she said. Brooke was standing in her mother's kitchen. She set down the mug she was holding. What are the terms? Felony assault, evidence tampering, wire fraud, 3 counts as part of the federal case. 12 years, eligible for parole at 8. He cannot contact you, your mother, any named witnesses, or any individuals connected to the investigation. He surrendered all assets held through the Mercer business accounts. A pause. He does not get to call it an accident. That last line was something Brooke had put in a letter to the prosecutor's office 6 weeks earlier. She had written 3 paragraphs about what she needed the agreement to contain, and that was the one thing she had been most specific about. Not the sentence length, not the financial terms, the word accident. She needed it out. It's not in the language, Lena confirmed. The plea allocution acknowledges intentional conduct. He said it in open court. Brooke picked up her mug again. Her hand was steady. Okay, Brooke. He said it in open court. On the record. I know. She let that settle. Thank you. Lena. The federal case continues separately. Calvin's trial date is set for 14 months out. Laura's office will keep you updated. After she hung up, she stood in the kitchen for a while and thought about what she felt, because she had learned over 8 months to pay attention to that, not to perform what she was supposed to feel, not to rush toward the emotion that the stories seemed to call for, but to actually check. What was there? What was there was something quiet, not relief, not triumph, something more like the specific feeling of setting down a weight you'd been carrying for so long that you'd stopped noticing the strain, and only now, with your hands empty, understanding how heavy it had actually been. She called Wade. He picked up on the 3rd ring. She could hear the garage in the background metal sounds, a radio low, his natural habitat. He took the plea, she said. A beat, terms 12 years. No accident language. Federal case still running. She heard him exhale. Not dramatic, not theatrical. Just a breath going out. Okay, she agreed. You all right? She thought about it. I think I'm going to be. That's the right answer, he said. She smiled, which surprised her, and then didn't surprise her, which surprised her more. Wade, the opening is in 6 weeks. I know. I need you there. Brooke. His voice was level and certain, the voice he used when something was already decided. Where else would I be? The Red Toolbox project had started the way most real things started, not with a plan, but with a problem and a person stubborn enough to refuse to leave it alone. It had been Brooke's idea, but it had become something else in the building of it, the way ideas did when enough people who cared about them got involved. Rosa had taken on the organizational structure. Nora had donated the building, a section of the shop that Patrick had used for storage, which she had cleared out and quietly been renovating for 3 months before she told Brooke what she was doing. Lena had connected them with a network of legal advocates and domestic violences who had been doing this work for years and knew where the gaps were and what filled them. Carla Reyes, who had moved back to Cedar Ridge in month 5, had become the project's first volunteer coordinator. She had a practical efficiency that Brooke admired and a particular quality, the quality of someone who had been failed by a system and come back to fix it rather than flee from it, that made everyone around her work harder. The name had been Brooks because there was no other name it could have been. The red toolbox that her father had built, the red toolbox she had packed with evidence. The toolbox Nora had opened at 1 a.m. with a woman from the AG's office standing across from her. It was the right name. It said everything the project needed to say in 3 words. Keep the things that matter somewhere safe. The project did 5 things. It helped isolated people safely document evidence. It connected them with advocates who understood the legal landscape. It arranged transportation to appointments, medical evaluations, courthouse proceedings. It maintained a confidential emergency line staffed by trained professionals. And it provided a network of community witnesses, people willing to show up, stay visible, and ensure that no one moved through the system alone. The Hells Angels chapter's involvement had been negotiated carefully. Brooke had spent 2 weeks talking with Wade and with the advocates about where the line was, because the line mattered. She had told the journalist in her first sit-down interview at the 2-month mark that she did not want the story to be about a group of bikers saving a woman, because that story was incomplete, and it was also, in a subtle way, dangerous. It suggested that what people in her situation needed was a dramatic rescue, when what they actually needed was documentation, legal support, professional advocacy, and the sustained, unspectacular work of being believed. The journalist had pushed back, but they did save you. They helped me save myself, Brooke said. There's a difference, and the difference is everything. If I hadn't had 6 months of evidence, the recording, the phone 12 motorcycles at the property line wouldn't have changed the outcome. What changed the outcome was preparation. The writers made the preparation matter at the right moment. The journalist had used that quote. It had been shared more than anything else Brooke had said publicly, which told her something about what people were ready to hear. Hells Angels members in the project volunteered in 4 ways only. They escorted survivors to appointments when specifically requested by the survivor. They repaired donated vehicles through the shop. They supported fundraising rides. They acted as visible community witnesses at public events, not enforcers, not protectors in the physical sense, just people who showed up and were seen and made the implicit statement that this community was watching and cared about what it saw. Ray Brennan had been the one to articulate the principle most clearly. In a planning meeting 6 months earlier, he had said, "We're not bodyguards. We're not here to intimidate anyone. We're here because visible community presence changes the calculation for people who rely on isolation to do what they do. They count on nobody watching. We watch." Brooke had written that down and put it in the project's founding document. The opening event was on a Saturday in late spring. The building smelled like fresh paint, and the coffee Nora had been making since 5 in the morning, and by 9 o'clock the parking area was full, and people were standing outside, and Brooke was in the back room with Rosa going over the order of the morning for the 4th time. "You're going to be fine," Rosa said. "I know. You keep saying you know things, and then going over them again." "That's how I know things," Brooke said. "I go over them until they're solid." Rosa looked at her for a moment. "Your dad did that." Brooke looked up. "He did?" "Every time he was nervous about something, he'd go over the plan. Check it 3 times, 4. Not because he thought it would change, but because going through the steps was how he got his feet under him." She paused. "I watched him do it before your parents' first big charity auction. He checked the setup 4 times and then walked out and ran the whole thing like it was nothing." Brooke sat with that. "You never told me that. I didn't think it mattered until right now." Outside, she could hear more cars, more voices. She could hear Nora greeting people at the door with the particular warmth her mother had always had, unhurried, specific, remembering names and asking the right follow-up questions. She could hear, faintly, the sound of motorcycle engines turning off in sequence, which meant Wade's group had arrived. She breathed. She went over the plan one more time. She got her feet under her. She walked out. The first person she saw when she came through the main door was Carla, who was at the registration table with a clipboard and the focused energy of someone who had found the thing they were supposed to be doing. Carla looked up and gave her a nod that said everything was in order, and Brooke nodded back and kept moving. She saw Wade near the far side of the room. He was talking to a woman Brooke didn't recognize, mid-40s. Careful posture, the look of someone who had come from a distance and was trying to figure out whether this was the right place. Wade was listening to her with the full body attention. He gave everything, not checking the room, not calculating, just present. The woman said something, and Wade said something back, and she nodded slowly, and something in her shoulders shifted. Brooke watched that for a moment. Then she went to speak to the advocate team, because there was work to do and the morning was moving. The formal program was short. Brooke had been deliberate about that. She had attended enough events that were really performances presentations designed to make attendees feel good rather than to make anything happen. And she had decided that the opening of this project was not going to be one of them. She spoke for 11 minutes. She said what the project did. She said who it was for. She said how to reach it, how to refer someone, how to volunteer, what the boundaries were. She said that the most important thing the project offered was not resources, though resources mattered, but the assurance that no one had to prove their pain was serious enough before someone would listen. She said, "The first question this line will answer when someone calls is not what happened to you, or how bad was it, or do you have evidence? The first question is, are you safe right now? That's it. We go from there." She paused. "I spent 2 years in a situation where I was not safe, and the thing that kept me inside it longest was not fear of what would happen if I left. It was the belief that what was happening didn't count, that it wasn't bad enough, that I wasn't believable enough, that I hadn't earned help." She stopped. "I want this project to be the answer to that belief, because that belief is a lie, and it is a lie that was put there deliberately by someone who needed me to believe it to keep me from leaving." The room was quiet. "You do not have to earn help," she said. "If something frightens you, it matters. That's the whole standard. That's what we're here for." She stopped speaking. People began to move, and the room filled with noise again, the particular noise of a thing that had started, and she stood at the edge of it and let it happen. Nora found her 10 minutes later and handed her a cup of coffee and stood beside her and didn't say anything for a moment. "Well," Nora said finally. "Well," Brooke agreed. "Your father would have talked for 40 minutes, Nora said. "He would have told 3 stories that seemed unrelated and then turned out to be the same story. He would have made everyone cry and then made them laugh and then made them cry again." She looked at her daughter. "You said what needed to be said." "I'm not Dad," Nora said. "Simply, you're you. That's what this needed." Brooke drank her coffee and watched the room. The twist that Brooke had not anticipated, the one that came not from a courtroom or an investigation, but from inside the event itself, in the last hour of the morning started with a woman she had never met, who had driven 3 hours from a town she had never been to, and who had come with a folder. Her name was Denise Hartley. She was 61 years old, retired school administrator, and she had read Nora's statement in the paper 4 months earlier and had been carrying a folder since then, trying to decide whether to bring it somewhere. She brought it to Brooke directly, in the corner of the room, while the event was still going around them. "I'm going to tell you something," Denise said, "and I need you to not react immediately." Brooke said, "Okay. My daughter filed a complaint against a property owned by Calvin Mercer's holding company in 2019. Workplace complaint, financial misconduct and harassment." She held out the folder. The complaint was reviewed and dismissed by an external review board. The board was staffed by 2 individuals. One of them was a woman named Patricia Helm, who I have since discovered is a part-time legal consultant for the Mercer family. Brooke took the folder. She opened it. The other board member, Denise said, was a county health administrator named Gerald Foss, who is currently employed, I checked this 2 days ago, as a benefits consultant for the New Development Corporation that Calvin Mercer launched in 2023, after the foundation was under investigation. Brooke looked up from the folder. "They moved the operation," Denise said. "Whatever the foundation was, whatever it was covering, they started building a replacement before the investigation was 6 months old, under a different name, with a different structure." She looked at Brooke steadily. "I don't know if this is something that matters. I don't know if it's too late or too complicated, or it matters," Brooke said. "I didn't know who else to bring it to. You brought it to the right place." Brooke looked at the folder again. "Can I make copies?" "I brought copies. The originals are in 2 other locations," Denise said it with particular practicality of a woman who had done her research. "I read your statement about keeping evidence somewhere safe." Brooke looked at her. 61 years old, retired, 3-hour drive, a folder she'd been carrying for 4 months. "You built your own toolbox. Denise looked at her steadily. I didn't know what else to call it. Brooke closed the folder. Laura Shen, she said. I'm going to give you her number. She's in the state AG's office. She needs to see this today. Not this week. Today. She pulled out her phone. Her hand was not shaking. She found Laura's number and wrote it on the back of a project card and handed it to Denise. And Denise took it with both hands. Is your daughter okay? Brooke said. She moved away. She's okay. A pause. She doesn't talk about it. She might someday, Brooke said. When she's ready, this is here. Denise nodded. She put the card in her pocket. She stood up and straightened her jacket. And there was a particular quality, the quality to the scene, straightening the quality, someone who has been carrying something for a long time and has just carefully set it down somewhere it will be looked after. She left. Brooke called Laura immediately and talked for 4 minutes in the hallway outside the main room. Laura said 2 things that mattered. Send me the folder today. And if what she's describing is accurate, Calvin was building a successor structure while we were investigating the foundation. That's not just fraud. That's consciousness of guilt. Brooke hung up and stood in the hallway for a moment, processing. The man who had built the infrastructure that swallowed 8 women's complaints, who had funded his son's violence through layers of corporate structure, who had put his family's name on a charity that drained money from injured workers and displaced families. That man had watched the investigation close in and had started building the next version. Because that was what people like Calvin Mercer did. They didn't stop. They adapted. They found the next structure, the next layer, the next name. They counted on everyone else being tired. Brooke walked back into the main room. She was not tired. The last part of the morning that she would remember most clearly, the part she would describe to Rosa later. Sitting in Nora's kitchen with cold coffee and the particular exhaustion of a day that had taken everything was what happened when she found Wade. He was near the door, talking to Ray and 2 other riders, and he was holding something under his arm. She had not noticed it when she'd seen him earlier. He saw her coming and said something to the others, and they moved aside, and he held out what he was carrying, the red toolbox. Not her box, the one from the shop, the one Nora had opened that night. This was different. This was her father's. She knew it the moment she looked at it, knew it the way you knew the particular texture of something you'd grown up around, the specific color of the paint Patrick had chosen, the worn corner on the right side from decades of being set down on concrete. Where did you get this, she said. Nora, Wade said. She had it restored. Took 3 months. She didn't want to tell you until it was right. Brooke took it. It was heavier than she expected, or maybe she had just forgotten how it felt. She set it on the table beside her and opened it. The old tools were there. Her father's wrench, worn smooth at the handle, a ratchet set, a folded shop rag. And on the inside of the lid, where Patrick used to tape notes and reminders, phone numbers, torque specs, the occasional joke cut from a magazine, there was a small metal plate, screwed in clean. Engraved on it, in the simple block letters Patrick had always used when he was being serious, if my girl ever calls, answer. She read it once. She read it again. She pressed her thumb against the letters and felt the cut of each one. Then she looked at Wade. I had it made 6 weeks ago, he said. I've been waiting for the right moment. This is the right moment, she said. She stood there for a moment, holding the toolbox, and she thought about her father. Not the way she usually thought about him, the specific memory, the particular scene, but something broader, the shape of him, the kind of man he had been, a man who built things, a man who believed that preparation was a form of love, that keeping something safe was an act of devotion, that the relay in the wall and the combination on the lock and the promise made at a hospital bedside were all the same thing expressed in different forms. She had inherited all of it. Not the shop, not the tools, not even the specific things he'd built, but the understanding underneath them. That you protected what you loved by building something that would last past the moment of crisis. That you kept evidence. That you maintained the emergency line. That you answered. She reached into the bag she'd been carrying all morning, and she took out a small flat case. Inside it was a metal plate of her own, the same size as Wade's, and a set of small screws and a screwdriver. Wade looked at it. You had one made too. 6 weeks ago, she said. I've been waiting too. She screwed it in beneath his, below the plate with her father's words, and when it was in, she straightened and read the 2 lines together. If my girl ever calls, answer. And when someone else calls, we answer together. Ray Brennan, who had been watching from 3 feet away with the careful stillness he used when he didn't trust himself to speak, turned to look at the wall for a moment. Brooke noticed. She did not point it out. The rest of the day moved the way days did when they had been weighted with significance quickly, and then suddenly over. People left. The room emptied. Rosa and Carla broke down the tables. Nora washed cups. By 6 in the evening, it was just Brooke in the building, and the red toolbox on the table, and the quiet particular to a space that has held a lot of people and is adjusting to holding fewer. She was about to turn off the lights when the emergency line rang. It was a new number, not a contact she recognized. She looked at the screen for 1 second, and then she picked up. Red Toolbox Project, she said. You've reached the emergency line. Silence. Then breathing. Then a voice. Young. Careful. With the particular quality of someone who had rehearsed what they were going to say and was now not sure they remembered it. I don't know if what's happening to me counts, the voice said. Brooke closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, she was already reaching for the notepad on the table. Pen in hand, weight forward on both feet. It counts, she said. You called, which means something frightened you, enough to reach out. That's the only bar. You've already cleared it. She kept her voice steady and warm and completely certain. My name is Brooke. I'm here. Tell me what's happening. Outside, she could hear engines. Wade had not gone home. She had not asked him to stay, and he had stayed anyway, and Ray was with him. And she could see through the window that they were not pacing or waiting in any agitated way. They were just there, the way they had been at the property line 8 months ago, in the rain at midnight, with their cameras running and their feet on a public road, and their entire presence saying the one thing that presence, at its best, always said, you are not alone in this. A trained advocate arrived 4 minutes into the call, slipping in the side door with a nod to Brooke, and began making the calls that needed to be made: shelter, transport, documentation. The work that was not dramatic and was not the kind of thing that made a story, but was, in fact, the whole point. Brooke stayed on the line. She stayed on the line because someone needed her to be there, and because she understood now, with the specific clarity that only comes from having been on the other side of it, what it meant to hear a voice in the dark that wasn't asking you to justify your fear before it would agree to listen. She stayed on the line because her father had built a relay, and she had built a project, and Wade had made a promise, and Nora had opened a toolbox, and Rosa had sent a link, and Carla had driven back to a town that had failed her, and Denise had carried a folder for 4 months, and Laura Shen had answered her phone at 2 in the morning, and the paramedic named Reyes had written everything down word for word. She stayed because the work was a chain, and every link was a person who had decided to answer. Abuse lived in isolation. It fed on a silence and distance, and the manufactured belief that what was happening wasn't serious enough to report, wasn't clear enough to prove, wasn't bad enough to deserve help. It fed on the idea that no one was watching and no one would come. The Red Toolbox Project was the answer to that idea. Not a dramatic answer, not a perfect one, a practical one, built from evidence and advocacy, and the stubborn refusal to let people disappear onto the side that had been built around them. That was all it was. That was everything it was. When the call ended and the person on the other end of the line was in the hands of the advocate team and moving towards something safer, Brooke set the phone down and picked up the red toolbox and carried it to its place on the shelf by the door, the place Nora had built for it, the place it would be every morning when someone walked in and every evening when the last person left. She turned off the lights. She walked outside, and Wade looked up from where he was, leaning against his bike. And she said, "We have a case already," Ray said. "Already," she said. Wade straightened. "What do you need?" She looked at him in the evening light, at the man who had answered a dead man's number in the middle of the night because 40 years ago a good man had asked him to. At the man who had carried his own grief and his own failure and had chosen to turn it into something useful rather than something hidden. Tonight, just witnesses, she said. Advocates already working, but I need visible presence near the location while transport is arranged. Tell me where, Wade said. She told him. He told Ray. Ray told the others, three of them, who had not left when the event ended. They did not ask questions. They started their engines. That was the thing. That was always the thing. You built the system. You maintained the line. You kept the evidence. You answered the call. And when the moment came, the people who had promised to show up showed up. Patrick Callahan had known that. He had known it about Wade, and he had known it about himself. And he had built it into the walls of a house and the inside of a toolbox, and the last words he'd spoken with enough breath left to mean them. A broken arm on a laundry room floor had started all of this. One text aimed at the wrong number, caught by a relay 16 years old, received by a man who understood what a promise was. And from that single trembling thread, pulled in the dark by a woman who refused to disappear quietly, the whole thing had unraveled not just one man's violence, not just one family's fraud, but the entire architecture of silence that had made both of them possible for so long. Truth did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived as a satellite signal from a dead man's house, finding its way to the one person who was listening. But when it arrived, and when enough people chose to hold it, instead of look away, it held. That was what Brooke Callahan knew now. Standing outside the building her father's hands had partly built, watching 4 motorcycles move into the night towards someone who needed them. She knew it in her healed arm, and her scarred skin, and her steady hands, and her voice that had learned to say clearly, without apology, without performance, without waiting for permission, I'm here. You called, that's enough. Let's start.